Hey folks, how you doing? I'm Jeff Donor. I am the co-creator of ArtHouseTO, and you are watching ArtTV. What is ArtTV? ArtTV is a window onto ArtHouseTO, a way of branching off and building on what is happening with ArtHouseTO. More on that later. What we do want to do is introduce this next interview that I did with the incredible Khaleel Seivwright. Enjoy the interview. Thank you so much for taking time to be here, to be in person. This is our first in-person interview for ArtHouseTV, and it couldn't be more honored to have you be that person. Tiny Shelters started from Khaleel. You actually, I believe you built the first one for yourself out in BC.
And I guess it's funny that I guess also in BC, the very first one I built was staying in a community in New Hazelton, 15 hours north of Vancouver. So that was like the original prototype, I guess, of that design. And then coming to Toronto, the first one I built in Toronto was also partially for myself. And with the idea that this is something that I can go and use at some point if I needed to or if I wanted to, and with a note on the front of it saying that if anyone wanted to stay here, they could.
Right.
Yeah.
And you also received a lot of press coverage for this as well. Good Morning America, New York Times, Drew Barrymore even gave you a shout out too. Which I think is pretty cool. And you also felt like this was something that you could do, right? Like that you could do to support our unhoused neighbors and a way to contribute with your skill set. And for those who want to find out more, there's a lot to that Khaleel's done a lot of interviews about this, and you can find out more about that and about how the city of Toronto essentially shut that down. That's a whole other story that has been covered and in particular covered in a documentary called Someone Lives Here. And I want to kind of segue into that because it was just recently that the Someone Lives Here showed at Hot Docs Film Festival. And you enjoyed a judges panel of, you won Social Impact Award, I believe. With your fellow filmmaker, Zack Russell.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to say fellow filmmaker because he's the filmmaker. And I guess I was the subject. I was shown the documentary before it was like finally put out, but I wasn't actively involved in the making of the documentary.
So you was more the subject of the film. And also won People's Choice
as well
award too. So congratulations, man. That's awesome. And congratulations to Zack and to the whole team and everybody involved in that.
And it's it's funny. It's like at this point, or at least this is just something me and Zack have been like talking about. It's like the feeling that we're getting now with the conversations we're having is like very similar to the energy that we had while we were in the middle of building the tiny shelters. And it's this sense of like, there's a lot of people reaching out that want to do something, that want to get together. And it's like, cool, this really exciting period of like, we can do something. It's like, that's that sensation.
So can you talk a little bit about how that came to be, how Zack got involved and how it started?
I guess he sent me an email. A few different people actually sent me emails that were interested in making a documentary or some sort of film about what I was working on, and everyone I just replied pretty flatly, like, no. Like, and I said same thing with Zack, and he was the only one that was like extremely persistent and kept sending me emails like, what can I possibly do?
Why no?
I was very disinterested in being filmed. I generally don't like being filmed in general, and like I think that has changed for me now, or at least I see the point of doing that. Like it has a greater purpose than my discomfort. So
Yep.
yeah, so I've become fine with it.
Yeah, yeah.
But at that point, I was someone that like if someone's trying to take my picture, I would generally like swat the phone out of their hand.
Yeah.
or like cover my face, like quite generally. Like
Yeah,
any of my
yeah.
friends would speak to that. And
Yeah.
and that was a reality for me.
Yeah.
I did not like having my picture taken for the most part. And yeah, and from that perspective, it's like, of course not. Of course I'm not going to do that.
So that must really speak to the relationship you have with Zach then.
Yeah.
That you're able to, because he obviously had to be in your space an awful lot, right?
Yeah.
So that it must speak to how I guess symbiotic that sort of relationship became, right?
It did, and it really did. Like he really grew on me, and I guess what allowed that to happen was me asking him if he could make a how-to video for the
Yep.
building of the tiny shelters, and he agreed, and it was pretty intensive. Like he followed me through the build, and like I explained each step quite in detail, and then he put it together really quickly, and then we had it up for folks that were emailing me asking, how do we do this where we are? Like, do you have designs? Do you have any plans? And it's like, all right, I'll make a how-to video. And he was able to put that out very quickly, and from then it's like, all right, like, you know, like, I trust you. Or it's like this feeling of like, I like working with this person.
Yeah.
And he was just like very diligent, very energetic, and excited to help. And he continued to be that person.
Yeah.
And he still is that person. And it's very nice. Yeah.
And you've continued a relationship, friendship after that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's awesome. What would you hope people would take away from that documentary?
I guess that there's so many different things, I guess. And it's just like it's kind of a shame that, you know, we had the chance to make this documentary and then you see my face so many times.
Yeah.
And there's just so many other people that were like working long before I started building tiny shelters that were fighting the city to help people outside. And, you know, and are continuing to do that work right now. And, you know, I'd say the biggest takeaway is like there are systematic changes that need to happen. And I guess the documentary didn't necessarily touch on those, but it highlights the fact that is necessary, like the approach the city is taking towards homelessness. And that's not a unique, like, oh, you know, this is a unique situation where we're experiencing all these encampments, like we need to get rid of them quickly. It's like, that's not a unique thing to this period in time. That's been a historically consistent thing.
Yep.
With the approach the city has towards homelessness, that's visible. And it's only unique in the fact that there's been such large encampments and that it was such an issue for them to remove people from where they're staying. So, yeah, to me, a big takeaway is like you see the encampments, like everyone's cleared out of them. The grass is like nice and green. Everyone's hanging out, enjoying themselves. It's like there's a cost for that. And it's like literally people's lives that are staying outside. And, you know, it's like, it's interesting when someone is, you know, very against these quote unquote non-residents that are living in encampments being out of their space. But these are people from Toronto. Like, they live in Toronto. They're living here. But the takeaway, like, I think a huge takeaway is that, like, that, I don't know, that there's still a problem. Like, the park is completely cleared and violence was committed on people's behalf. When they vote for councillors that say we need to get encampments out of here, violence has been committed on your behalf. And so it's like, you know, we need to make a different decision about approaching homelessness. We need, like, collectively. And then through our collective decision, like, the government has to act on our behalf. Because the government is currently acting on, you know, wealthier citizens' behalf that own property in these areas instead of the people that are more vulnerable.
Right.
And that needs to change. I think many people need to realize, I don't know, that's not a solution. That sending police in to move people out of encampments is not a solution for
the
anyone.
tune of $2 million of taxpayers' money. Right?
Yeah, and that was just that 1 year. That was just that one summer of clearing encampments. But it's just not a solution at all, because you're not solving homelessness by moving people around. Yeah. And it's like, all right, like, why don't we invest that same money that was spent on police officers doing this really violent action to creating alternative solutions that actually work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that we came to realize too is that were people that were housed before COVID, before rents became ridiculous and living in Toronto, who ended up in encampments as well, and that we're closer than we might think off it, right? To being in that same situation.
Being in that situation, and that's a part of this larger contextual picture that the documentary doesn't necessarily touch on, that I think is even more important. Mm-hmm. Is that there are policies in place that create homelessness. Like, I don't know, since 1994, the federal government has not been paying into affordable housing. It's like they suddenly stopped doing that in 1994 and, you know, get back into it in 2016, 2017. And it's like, oh yeah, suddenly there's this idea that, like, you know, that's going to fix everything. It's like, you stop doing something for 20 years, there's going to be consequences. Yeah. And I don't know. And there's other policies in place. And this is where I'm still discovering and trying to understand. It's like, yeah, I'm on this journey of trying to see the exact policies that need to change to make living in this city and probably many other cities across Canada actually reasonable. And one of those policies, at least in Ontario, is just around rent control. Yeah. And that's set by the Ontario government, where, you know, usually it's 1.5%, 2%. That's what you're allowed to increase rent by per year. And what ends up happening, there's like little loopholes. So like if your property is vacant, there's no rent control. So if you're, you know, if you have to do a renovation, you can tell all of your tenants to leave to make it vacant, and then you do whatever little, you just paint the walls, and then
call that a reno.
Call that a reno, and then have, which no one had to be evicted for, and then get in new quote unquote more desirable clients to pay much more rent, because there's no rent control. You can increase it 500, 600, 700. Right. And that's one terrible loophole that's being exploited by people to charge more, and then everything built after 2018, there's no rent control, which is also insane. So you can be living in a place and then the rent suddenly goes up $400 and there's no reason. And that's fine. That's perfectly reasonable and legal to do. And that seems insane if you're trying to build a city where people can afford to live here. That shouldn't even exist. That doesn't make sense.
It's not sustainable, right? Like, it's not sustainable for anyone. I mean, even when we look at food prices right now and everything, like, this is what I feel like more people need to understand, is that there's not such a huge gulf between being unhoused and where people are at right now. Yeah. Because it can be, one, lose your job, have some traumatic thing happen in your family, have an illness. There's so many things that you know, and do you feel like maybe if more people understood that or connected with that they might have more empathy?
I think so, but then it's funny, like the people that are experiencing that, they already know. They know pretty well, like, like, you know, just made it on rent this month. You know, it's like, cool, like next month I might be couch surfing, the month after that, I don't know.
Right. So people are closer to it, you're right, that have more of an awareness about that.
Yeah, and it's like an automatic awareness of like the threat of not being able to afford to stay where you're staying. And it's like, you know, and many people are being forced to like move from Toronto because they can't afford it with what they're doing. And it's like, you know, instead of waiting until like they get to that point where they are just actually homeless, it's like, all right, I'm gonna move before that happens. Right. And I don't know, that seems like an extremely unreasonable thing to have happen.
So this kind of segues nicely into the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the Tiny Home Community Project that you're working on. Yeah. Can you tell us more about that? Are you're able to tell us more about that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And the idea with the Tiny Home Community Project, it would be like something where there's like 25 cabins for folks, very similar to a project in Kitchener called the Better Tent City. Yep. And they've been operating for about 3 years, and they got about 44 cabins there for folks to stay in, and they have like a central building with washrooms and showers and laundry, and then they have another communal building with a kitchen and fridges and freezers and like a cooktop and everything, and it just works for people. Or it's like a very human approach, which is such a strange thing to say. Yeah, it's like a very human approach to people and like the shit they're going through. I don't know if we can swear.
Oh yeah, swear. Fuck yeah. We can
Alright.
swear.
But
This is our show. We can
okay.
say whatever we want.
right on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an extremely, I don't know, intimate human approach to people's personal issues where it's like they're taken into account, and you know, rules are not like set in stone where it's like, cool, you break them, that's it, you
Right.
are no longer allowed to survive, which is the case in the shelter system in Toronto currently, where there are rules and there's temporary staff that, you know, enforce those rules, and if you break these rules or give a negative impression to certain staff, it's like you literally lose your ability to survive.
Right.
And that is terrible.
And you say it's contingent on who might be working
Yeah.
on that shift, or wow.
And just the idea of like literally your behavior, or like, you know, you bringing up feedback to someone that's providing these services is like a threat to your ability to survive. Automatically that encourages you not to say anything.
Right.
And it's just like, that's a really terrible, I don't know, that's a terrible loop. That's a terrible way to like operate something that you want to work for people, because you're encouraging people without, you know, making sure that that's not the case. You're encouraging people not to speak out, not to say why this is wrong, or this staff is being this way and why that's incorrect, or it's like why that's not beneficial for me trying to go to work and stay in the shelter right now. And and you don't have that at a better tent city. You have the folks that are working there really trying to appeal to the people that are actually their clients, that are like, they're actually working for them. And it's like, oh, that's such a different model.
And I guess trying to design it more around their needs rather than imposing some kind of structure, or
exactly a top-down structure, which is usually the case with respites and shelters, where like there are certain times that you have to be in. If you're not in by that time, you've lost your spot. And then you have to be out for a portion of the day. You're like not allowed to be there during the day. So it's like, that's also a very strange rule, I guess, that they have in place. And then there's just like all of this expense put into just monitoring people, and going in, waking people up, checking in on them just to make sure they're alive. And it's just like the standardization of that. And you know, if you were sleeping there as a staff, if you were sleeping in that situation, it's like, I'm sure you would not appreciate that. And I don't know, just having an approach where and this is something, a part of the work that we're doing with the Tiny Home Community Project, is just going out, doing interviews with folks that are staying outside, and just, we have a really long questionnaire that kind of sucks to answer, but it's important because we're really trying to figure out, like, you know, if we try to build this Tiny Home Community Project, is this something that would really work for the needs that you have? And what will we need to have in this community to make sure that works and continues to work? And it's like, that is completely informing the way that we're going forward. And overwhelmingly, autonomy is a huge thing that you don't get when you're staying in a shelter or staying in a respite. And then also autonomy, and then also like a sense of community, and that has to do with like consistency. That has to do with like having a stable situation and like seeing folks, sharing a community with them, and like you get to participate in this and like help build this and make it better for each other. And it's like, you know, and that's something that you sort of, that happens in encampments actually, like where you have more of a sense of community, because you know your neighbor, you know the person staying in that tent, and you see a stranger coming up to their tent, and you go and like, who the hell are you? Like, why are you going in my buddy's tent? And it's you know, there's this sense of like actually wanting to protect each other, and it's like, that's actually really important. And
I feel that's a loss a lot in those conversations, is that we talk about the violence, we talk about displacement, which are all horrible things, but the one thing I don't hear people talk a lot about is the community that is formed in those encampments and how that is obliterated. Right?
Exactly that.
And connections, and
and that's not really, you know, calculated in in encampment evictions. It's like, oh yeah, like we'll just move you around, and like, we'll possibly have a spot for you eventually.
We're gonna shuffle you up to a hotel up in North York where you don't know anybody,
or Scarborough, or this place or that place, and like, you don't need to have friends, you don't need to have connections with anyone there or there or there. It's like, you know, on paper, you just need to be moved into an indoor space so that we can communicate to the public that we've done our job.
Right.
And that sucks. And that's like, you know,
which are like sky high in COVID as well, especially around the time of the pandemic. Like the shelter systems were they were like a hotbed of like people were leaving because they didn't want to get sick in the shelters, right?
And it's not just being sick; it's like lots of violence, and then I don't know, and just lots of disease in general that goes around very quickly when you're in a space with like 100 cots.
Yeah.
And it's just like cool. Like, how are you supposed to sleep in a space with 100 people and no walls?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's like it becomes, very similar for a lot of people to prison.
So this is this balance, like we talk about, and imagining possible futures and looking at the tiny home project.
Yeah.
It's a way to be proactive and feel some hope too, right?
And I mean, and this is like just a very limited thing that I see makes sense, and it's like in building something that reflects the needs of the folks that are staying there, and then having a constant feedback loop where the residents are consulted about how are the services going, like how is this working for you, and that not necessarily being from the folks that are staying there, but like being a separate process to make sure that feedback is always being relayed,
right,
and that the services are always being adjusted to provide like effectively for the people that are living there. And that's something that I think is reasonable to do, and I feel excited to do that myself, and then the folks I'm working with as well. But I don't know. Yeah, there's just so many in terms of like possible futures that are nice.
Yeah.
It's like that is a really minute thing.
Yeah.
It's like a very specific thing that caters to
but
folks.
also very tangible thing, right? That people
tangible.
You can easily point to that example, and when people are naysayers about solutions, you can point to that and say, well, no, this is working, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it Waterloo that passed a bylaw that said they can't clear the encampments until people have one of the first places, I would say, in Ontario probably that's done that.
Yeah, it is. It is the first place in Ontario, and that was a bylaw that I guess I was fighting against, and the Encampment Support Network was very actively fighting against. Which is just allowing people to be evicted from encampments as a violation of human rights. Like saying that is a violation of human rights if you're kicking people out of encampments and like they don't have a place to go, like you are putting their life in danger. And it's amazing that has been recently passed this year.
Do you feel any hope here that something like that is possible?
Yeah, I also have a strange opinion about government in general, and I do feel like, and this is out of pure ignorance that I say this, that I do feel like there are people that we don't necessarily vote in that continue to be a part of government that have a lot of say in what happens. And if we're not changing those folks, and we're not like changing their opinions, then you're gonna have someone in office, you're gonna have a new mayor, and a lot of the same things are gonna continue to happen. And I don't know. And it's like, I have friends that really think it's like, why would you ever work with the government? It's like such a bad idea to do that, considering their track record of, just doing horrible things. And I don't know. It just seems, it is, to me, ultimately very fundamental unless you're planning a complete revolution. And it's like, cool. This is the organization that has the monopoly of violence in our region. So if you do something that is generally like completely against their values, they're going to find a way to crush you.
By the way, we hope to foment that revolution right here at ArtHouseTV. We've been planting seeds with ArtHouseTO. We hope that that's the case. Please join us.
And I guess there's this interesting perspective that I've been like just thinking about lately, where if you were planning to have some form of revolution, it's like it would first have to begin as a real effort to reform the government that is existent. And that would mean like getting as many people as you can together to agree with you about something that makes perfect sense, and trying to get this government that's on paper is supposed to be working for the majority of human beings, and trying to get them to do something that makes sense. And when you make every single effort to do that as a majority and that doesn't work, that is, to me, that is the formula for revolution. And then those people have just become aware of the fact that, you've made every single reasonable effort to change to make things work for people that is extremely reasonable, and it can't happen. Now you're forced.
I kind of feel like we're there. The solutions are already there on the ground. It's just they are either being ignored, or they're not being listened to, or they don't fit in with the corporate interest, or the interest of the government at the time. And I feel like we should be going the way of Paris right now, where it's like, you know what, we're gonna shut everything down.
Which is,
you know what I mean? Get
yeah.
unions involved, because it's unions that are part of the problem too, right? Like they're the ones that are literally going and driving the claw, scooping up people's stuff. And and I know they're doing their job, but the problem, it's not them, it's union leaders that I feel like should be saying, wait a minute, we don't want to be a part of that, right?
And I don't know in too much. I don't have enough information, I guess, to speak about that as much. But I do feel it's strange seeing folks like operating those machines, because I know they must think that is like terrible and strange.
It's gotta be. They gotta be feeling that, right?
Yeah, and I don't know, but it's also like this sense of like, cool, like I need to do this to like, feed my family.
Yeah, support my family, and
there's like a threat to their ability to survive for not doing.
Yeah. So there's a lot. I guess there's a lot of moving pieces in there, right? Like that makes this reality what it is. And just one more thing on the community project. So there's one in Hamilton, I believe, as well, a tiny home.
There's a group in Hamilton that has raised a lot of money, and they're pretty organized and they're very well put together. And so far, they haven't gotten property. They've pitched the project to the municipality in Hamilton and have not gotten very good feedback. So yeah, they're still working on getting that project built in Hamilton.
And how's the community been responding in Waterloo, in Kitchener-Waterloo?
In Kitchener, I can't speak too much to that, but the municipal government in Kitchener, they're looking at a better tent city, and now they're replicating that model and building another community.
Okay.
So
that's a good sign.
Yeah, that's a great sign. Yeah. And I can't speak to how the community is faring. I mean, generally from some conversations with the folks that work there, it's always, the neighborhood is always going to be hard to get on your side, because no one wants a project like that in their neighborhood.
Yeah. And
I think that's going to be pretty unanimous across the board, that is always going to be a struggle, convincing people. It's like, why is it better to have an encampment where people are literally struggling to survive than to have a tiny home community where they have resources and they have people that are helping them out? It's like, what is the difference to you whether whether someone is living a little more comfortably and has a more stable living situation than if they're staying in a tent? And I think there's this, on the back of their mind, there's this hope that they'll be removed.
Right. That
they won't be a part of their visual existence anymore, and they'll be relieved of the quote-unquote threat of someone that's unhoused. And and it's a shame. And I feel like a lot of that mentality comes from just like stigma and like different ideas about like what homeless people are actually like. It's like that they're like these completely different human beings than who you are, and it's I don't know. I find it strange, and and I guess that's why I'm really excited about the podcast.
I was just going to go right into that, so perfect segue.
Fuck yeah.
You are working on a podcast right now. Which did I correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a couple interviews in the bag already, or
we've done 2 interviews with folks and that's actually a part of another project, which too many things are happening, but
but it sounds like it's I mean, you just come off like a high of your doc showing at Hot Docs, which is great. Podcast, like I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and it seems, and it's so funny with the podcast. I mean, in light of the documentary, because there's so many stories and there's so many things that are happening that did not get touched on or did not get filled in with enough detail in the documentary, that I feel like that's the opportunity we have with doing a podcast. And
talk a bit more about that. And so what is the idea of your podcast?
And I guess the idea is basically just to go around and just talk to folks that are staying outside and just hear their entire experience, hear their story, hear like, where they come from, like what's going on for them, like the difficulties they have with staying and living outside, and like their dreams of the future and like their own visions for themselves. And I feel like just for me, like having a few of those conversations is like, holy shit, like this has completely changed my perspective. And it's like such an immediate thing that I imagine anyone that sits down and takes the time to watch something like that, you'll automatically have a different perspective. Unless you're already working with unhoused people, unless you're already in that space, I feel like it will definitely change whatever mentality you had about people that live outside. And I don't know, and it seems incredibly valuable. And like, if there's going to be any sort of solution for folks that are staying outside, it has to come from their experience. It has to come from the struggles that they're dealing with for it to actually be sustainable and make sense. Yeah.
So you kind of touched on it a bit. I was going to ask you, why is it so important to you?
Well,
But you were kind of heading there too.
And I feel like a goal of mine. And I guess I've articulated this in the Q&A after one of the screenings. After the last screening is like, it's like, how do I get someone to have enough information to make a decision when they go to vote for a mayor that's going to help people? It's like, how do I help someone get that information? It's like, it's probably not by telling them they're pieces of shit.
Probably not the most helpful.
But there's, some people have that approach, and it's like, fair enough. It's like, fair enough. But it's like, I guess I like the approach of like, it's like, in order to make a good decision, you just need more information. That's it. It's like, all you need to do is have more information. If you think you're a reasonable person, then you're going to be someone that's interested in having more information to make a better decision. And it's like, cool, if you agree with all that, then you can watch this and you can have more information from these conversations. And it's like, I relate that conversation, or I relate that idea to like, it's like, if you go into a room like 60 years ago, ask everyone, it's like, who here thinks that smoking is bad? It's like, you're going to get a mixed response. And, and nowadays you ask a room, and it's like, that's obvious. And it's like, only because we have the information to know that is linked to lung cancer and kills people. It's like, cool. It's like, now that you have the information, you can make a better decision for your life. And it's like super similar to like making a better decision for your community and making a decision for your city. It's like, what works, what doesn't work, and like having the information to make a good decision. It's like, that's sort of my perspective around that, and I like that perspective. It seems very like, it's just easy to agree with. It doesn't, and it's like, it doesn't matter what you believe in politically. It's like, it's probably a good idea. Generally.
Totally. And when do you see that being released to the world, or at least the first episode?
First episode, we're working on that. We've been working on that this week, and and it's not going to be, the first episode is going to be very different from what we continue to do. Just because we filmed it at a rehearsal factory. Whatever. And like,
with like some death metal band in the room next door. And...
you can hear them a little bit. And like, the lighting's not
That's
the
what
best.
I found with rehearsal factory. It's not the most best. Hermetic spaces, but
we're going to be doing the podcast out of the trailer and just traveling around and just asking
That's
folks.
So cool.
So I'm super excited about it, and like, we're gonna have a bookshelf and weird stuff on it, hopefully.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't even know that element of it. That's so awesome.
And that's something that, I don't know, it just seems very reasonable to do, and just meeting folks where they are instead of asking them to come somewhere.
Of course,
So that's a really exciting aspect of that. And then also not just having only folks that are staying outside like give their experiences, but like asking folks that are doing outreach work, different organizations, and like just getting their perspective and getting different views on the entirety of the situation, and hopefully eventually getting folks that can talk to us about the larger context of affordable housing and homelessness, and like what policies are creating that. And I don't know. That seems really exciting, because to me it feels like, all right, like, I want to know more.
Yep.
I'm excited to have this journey, and hopefully, like anyone watching is like very interested in like going on this journey to understanding the landscape of affordable housing and homelessness. And like, you know, I imagine, you know, unless you studied this your whole life, you probably don't know all the answers that we're going to discover together. So it's kind of cool.
I look forward to being on that journey with you and following too, because I want to learn and unlearn.
Yeah.
Too, right. Part of it is unlearning too what we think we know about the world, and I'm super excited about that.
Nice.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So I feel like I feel like I want to just keep talking to you forever, but I don't want to take up all of your time. I want to ask you this question. I've got two questions left.
Mm-hmm.
One question that ties us back into imagining possible futures.
Mm-hmm.
And as we mentioned, the whole inspiration of ArtHouseTO in the beginning was literally that. I'm looking over here because my partner Andrea, who is co-conspirator and co-creator of ArtHouseTO, that's what it is. We designed a building that doesn't exist, but and we color coded it to show what the different sectors, and what if all these sectors were together in this one plot of land, and what's that third element too that could happen when all these people are together, and it's a geared to income housing with live work studios for artists and community garden, and you know, so it was a process of creating this that was therapeutic for us. Nice. To create it at a time where we had been rent-evicted during the pandemic, and so in that light, and in imagining possible futures, because we're artists, and we're biased, but we want to prop up artists. You're an artist yourself, right? You're an artist. You're a musician. We'll probably use some of your footage of you playing our completely out of tune piano back here. Right on. Khaleel was rocking on it earlier on. So my question is, talk about why you feel it is important to invest energy into imagining possible futures and not just fighting the enemy, so to speak.
Yeah. I see, and I guess I'll use a strange word that I hear used, and I feel like it's used incorrectly, which is manifestation.
Yep.
And I feel like people just say, oh yeah, if you just say the word over and over again, it's just going to happen. And I feel like with manifesting a reality, with manifesting any future, it's like, I don't know. It's like you're constantly being programmed by everything around you.
Yep.
To think about other things that you would have never thought about if you didn't see this image or that image.
Yep.
And it's like, so there's an interest, like, by everything around you and your phone and like Facebook and this and that to make you think that this is what you want, or that's what you want, or that's what you want. So it's like, if you don't have an image of what you want in your life, there's no possible way of creating that. So it's like, it starts by having that image and then believing in that image, like actually having the feeling in yourself that this is possible, that this is real, and then the steps to go towards that image, that vision, becomes extremely reasonable and like foreseeable. That it's like, it's obvious to make the next step. It's like, oh, like I envision myself living off grid in a cabin in this community. It's like, cool, like what's the first step with that? It's just like, I guess, finding a community, and it's like, then you go online and you can find one, and
then what's the next step, and
then you discover like the path widens when you have a vision, and the path isn't there if you don't. And I fully believe in that, and it's extremely important to have a vision, because it's like, you can have enemies, you can have someone that you want to crush, but if you don't have a vision, that doesn't go anywhere. Right. And then when you do have a vision and you have an enemy in your way, then the idea isn't necessarily to defeat them. The idea is just to get to the vision. And there's many ways to get to the vision, regardless of the enemy or regardless of the obstacles in your way. It's like, you're able to find options in that way. But when you have an enemy and you need to defeat them, that there's no options outside of that. It becomes this.
Which could become like a battle of attrition, really, right?
Yeah, which is generally hard to win when you're facing something that has basically infinite resources and time.
I remember you mentioned, beautifully put, by the way. I remember you mentioned on the phone conversation we had, being able to envision a possible future allows you to find more clarity in what the actions you take now. And it gives it a context.
Yeah.
And it also gives that enemy a context. It puts that enemy, so to speak, in its proper proportion and context too. Right?
Yeah. And it's like, and it gives you this long-term, it gives you a long-term future. So it's like the struggles that you're facing today don't become impossible. They become necessary to getting to the thing. And it's like, okay, it's like, all right, like, yeah, this sucks. And it's like, cool, it's going to suck for a little bit. And then I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
Hopefully. That's
beautifully put, man. That's so awesome.
That's cool.
My final question then is how can this is Slayer.
Cool.
Named after one of my favorite bands.
Nice.
This is Little Mama. Say hi. So my final question is, how can people support you and support your work?
I guess my work, like what we're doing right now, we're in the process of negotiating, hopefully getting land to build soon. So a lot of our work right now is in just meetings and in conversations.
Yep.
But soon we're going to have the opportunity to have many people physically involved with what we're doing, and it's going to require just a lot of help. And I don't know, I guess stay tuned for that, and otherwise hopefully follow the podcast and join in on hearing about just different people's stories. And I don't know, how can you help? And I don't know, and there's so many organizations that are doing work right now that you can just reach out to and ask, hey, like, how do I do something, that are actively needing hands, that are needing people to come out and like help give out water bottles and clothes and tents to people that are staying outside. And it's like literally reaching out to like Anishinaabe Health, Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction, ESN. There's different community groups that are working there. Vahafta is also a really great group. They travel around in a van and like do very similar things, and like they're looking for volunteers. And it's like, I don't know, there's many routes that you can take if you're interested in helping, and it doesn't necessarily mean let's go hang out with Khaleel and and build a thing. I'm not currently building much at the moment, so it's hard to help me in what I'm doing. But I think, and that's what I also hope to do with the podcast as well, is like connect with many other groups that are like doing work, and just find something that you really believe that you can apply yourself to and want to do, and just go and do that. That's how you can help. And it's not necessarily working with me, but like becoming involved, becoming active in something that you believe in. Is what I think is really beneficial.
Khaleel,
cool.
Honestly, it's been a pleasure. We're gonna keep that a mystery. There's probably people watching going, what happened to his hand?
I fell out of a tree.
It's okay, there you go. Mystery solved.
I'm sorry.
Khaleel Seivwright, such a pleasure to have you here. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much. I know you're such a busy guy, so I really appreciate you coming here. I hope to have you back, and maybe we can play some music. And let's do that, man.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Awesome.
Nice.
So great to meet you in person, and this has been so amazing. Thank you, everybody. Much love to you all. See you again soon.